Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Steve Jorson with Northeast Metro Climate Action. We are a volunteer-run community organization with members in White Bear Lake, North Oaks, Vadnais Heights, Matamita, and Shoreview. Our mission is to raise awareness on the climate crisis through events like this that we've been doing since 2019, to do outreach, to talk to the public about different aspects of climate change. This is our last event of the year. We'll take the summer off and we'll start up again in September. We do them monthly from September through May. Our mission is to raise awareness on the climate crisis through these events and to work with state and local representatives to advance climate action. We work directly with many of our local elected leaders. And we also participate in community activities. This summer, we will be tabling at Market Fest. We'll be marching in parades. We'll be continuing our outreach through those types of community events. Northeast Metro Climate Action acknowledges we are meeting on traditional homelands of the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe people who continue to live in this area and exercise their treaty rights. Tonight, we are co-hosted by Resilient Roseville, Northwest Metro Climate Action, Vote Climate, the Vadnais Heights Green Team, Sustainable Stillwater, East Metro Eco Faith Collaborative, Indivisible North Metro, and the St. Croix Valley Indivisible Justice Team. We have lots of co-hosts tonight. And I've already talked to online people about housekeeping issues. So if you have any questions online, just put them in the chat and I'll be monitoring those. Tonight, we are very honored to have as a guest speaker, J. Drake Hamilton, to discuss moving away from natural gas, or as we call it, fossil gas, here in Minnesota. Jay is the climate policy expert and managing director of science policy for Fresh Energy, a nonprofit that works on policy here in the Twin Cities. And yeah, if through statewide policy action. Jay serves on the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change. And Jay has been to many of the Congress of Parties, the United Nations global get-togethers for the last 9 years, and will be in this year's COP30, they call it, in Brazil, representing our state in as part of Fresh Energy and the Advisory Council for Climate Change. Jay tonight will be exploring the science-based strategies for transitioning to a clean energy future. So with that, Jay.
Thank you, Steve. And my name is J. Drake Hamilton. I'm going to start with the first pieces of good news for us Minnesotans, all right? And we can, all of us in the United States, act to decrease our climate changing emissions by 30 to 50% by 2030. And now we have financial help for that and technical help. So some of you may have picked up what this poster looks like when it's folded up. If someone can hold it up. This is a free thing, a free resource that Fresh Energy created that told you 21 ways you can get federal rebates, refunds on your taxes for things you do in your home or your congregation or your business. And many of those are also doubled by refunds from the state of Minnesota. You need to read this closely, but please take it home and start looking at it, because my household in St. Paul, the Hamilton household, what we did this year was we rebuilt our detached garage. We expanded it to about 5 feet wider so that our garage can now hold 8 solar panels. And the garage is now where our EV, which is sitting right outside here, That's where our EV gets refueled by the sun. And my good news for you from our solar installation, now 6 months in the whole month of April, every day it produced more solar energy than our household plus our EV used. And that left us excess to sell back to Excel. And we got our solar installation put on by November, and we were probably the first people to file our federal income taxes. And I'm happy to report that in the first week of April, we got back $8,450. That's 30%. That means that solar was on sale for 30% less. You should see if you're able to do this. So that's a big piece of good news. And now I'll segue into this, because as Steve mentioned to you, I've been appointed by Governor Walz to his advisory council on climate change. And we are charged with, by December 1 of this year, telling him what next steps he should get into law to help us further in fighting climate change. And he's only interested in two things. He's not interested in blue sky ideas. He's interested in us taking the ideas to the people who do climate change modeling for the state of Minnesota and get them to model what our ideas will do in terms of reducing carbon emissions, and as well what it will cost. Is it affordable to do? And that is what we're going to come up with. We'd love to get your help. This summer, we're about to go out with some prototype new ideas. You can weigh in on these ideas. Tell the governor what you like. Tell him what you want to see revised. Anything you want to say, we want to get you. And that is the colored single piece of paper up there. And if you sign up on our form, I will send you the notice when these public comments are now accepted, okay? And we are very serious. I'm going all over the state and asking people for comments. You should be a set of those comments too. And by the way, what we're doing is giving the governor his 2.0 of his climate action framework, an improved one with actionable next steps that Minnesota can take. And I'll tell you what refers to this, because the state law now says by 2035, we must reduce greenhouse gas emissions from existing buildings by 50% compared to 2005. 50% reduction. And most of the energy we use in most of our houses around here is from burning natural gas. That is why when Steve was watching in on the advisory climate change meeting, I think in February, and you saw me give this presentation and you liked it and asked me to come give it to you all. So this is largely what this is. And I would love to take your questions. So this is the work done by my fabulous colleagues at Fresh Energy. We're based in St. Paul, founded in Minnesota, and we're now 33 years old. I haven't been around all that time, but I've been the farthest along staff person. And we decided in early 2024 that we were looking back on what Minnesota had already accomplished. And raise your hand if you remember this from 2021. 2021, it was a difficult legislature. They're always difficult in different ways. But in 2021, we were shocked to see a strong group of bipartisan people support the passage of two laws. One was a great improvement in our energy efficiency law. It's now called the ECO Act, passed in 2021. And we passed a new law called the Natural Gas Innovation Act, which requires natural gas utilities to modernize and innovate away from natural gas. But in 2024, we were looking back at those laws that had passed way back in 2021, and we saw, well, wait a minute, we don't see the implementers who are regulators at the Public Utilities Commission have yet done really anything about this. So we got on their cases. We got on their cases, and we're very polite and we're very insistent, and we said, these laws were signed into law by the governor in 2021, and now they need to be implemented. But we knew that we were going to be in charge of doing this deep dive paper on what we could find out about it, so we could give them a place to know where they were starting from. So we called this our deep dive white paper. This is me, and by the way, if you think you're going to have questions after this, and I hope you do, because I hope you're going to be involved in fighting climate change for a while, take one of my cards on the back table and use my email address. And don't be afraid of communicating with me that way. I want to hear your comments, I want to hear your questions, and I want to get them answered. So this is what we do. We have a mission that has now been expanded this year, and we call it our Vision for 2030. You may know us for a long time as being involved in making our transition to clean energy in Minnesota. That's mostly about electricity. Maybe you've also heard work we're doing in buildings, which is quite extensive, or you've heard about our work in transportation and in getting more EVs on the road. We've done all those. But then we decided internally in Fresh Energy that what we needed to lead on was decarbonizing every sector of our economy. Because that is what, if you read about the climate change crisis, you know we need to decarbonize every sector. So that is really behind us. And we expanded our program areas. We have hired our first staff person who works on greening up industries in Minnesota. And he's soon to be joined by another colleague who'll be specializing in greening up agriculture. So that's where we are. In a nutshell, this study that we did looks at the future of, if you want to call it natural gas, it is natural gas, but it's also fossil gas. And it's also a very potent greenhouse gas emission source. So we needed to think about the future of gas, given its impacts on climate, on our health, and on building electrification, which we have always found for the last 5 years that many technologies that we should have in our house that are the most efficient and the cleanest are electrified, not run on natural gas. So we also want to put this in context of the energy transition and on grounding future policy we may need to make sure it's happening in Minnesota. So some of the key questions for our research aimed at, to what extent are Minnesotans relying on natural gas for heating their homes? Or are they relying on other things? We wanted to lay that out. We want to know, what is the current state of natural gas distribution systems? And we found out a lot about it. Are there any significant trends in the system, in the consumption of natural gas, Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? We were shocked what we found, and I'll show it to you. And how do the buildings sector's emissions compare to the Minnesota's goals? Remember the goal I just told you? 50% reduction in greenhouse gases. So, and what are utilities planning to do to replace their gas distribution systems, and how much will it cost ratepayers? We really wanted to know, we wanted to ask a bigger question, because as you know, there are dozens of utilities in the state, and they're all quite different. And we think some of them have thought a lot about this, some have not thought about it yet at all. And many of them have to go before regulators at our Public Utilities Commission to propose their plans and get them approved or not approved. So that is a test point for them. All right, the first thing we did was look at, we definitely found that natural gas is the predominant fuel used for home heating. Look at that, utility gas is the first line. It's the most, it's very prominent in the US. It's more dominant in Minnesota. Look at all that. So natural gas heats about 2 out of 3 Minnesota homes. And among renter-owned households, 39% of people heat their homes with electricity. So renters seem to be a different group, and that's interesting. This is a map, and you can look, you can see the legend of the map, what the colors mean. And the natural gas service covers much of the larger population centers in the state, especially the Twin Cities. It's a dominant fuel. All right. And next, we divided this up into different companies. I'm just going to mention a couple of them by names. First of all, it's an incredibly large system of pipes, mostly underground. You may not even have any idea where these pipes run. You may. Chances are you don't. CPE is for Center Point Energy, and it's mostly for people who live in Minneapolis. All right, that's what their gas company is called. I live in St. Paul, and maybe here in the Northeast Metro, you get your gas, like both your gas and your electricity from Xcel. I'm in that position. These are other units. And look at this, the miles of gas main in 2022, and the right column is the times they go around the earth. So you may have heard that the biggest machine on earth is the transmission lines that you can see overhead, and that's true. But a second one is going to be the gas lines. So just always be thinking about this planet runs largely on power. And you can see a lot of it. And there are good reasons for that too. All right. So we just took account starting from 2010 to 2022 by different companies, the total miles of gas mains in Minnesota have risen. Look at that. And every company has put in more gas mains. So that shouldn't be encouraging to you, because we've already found that natural gas is heating most of our homes and is very potent greenhouse gas. And remember, the law that passed in Minnesota, which is the strongest in the nation, in 2023, is Minnesota's 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. That's our law. And that was passed with the support of every single utility in Minnesota. They all said it was doable. In fact, My electric and gas company, Excel, is the #1 in the country because they said in February this year, we're going to reach 100% carbon free, not by 2040. We're going to do it by 2035. So make a note of that. And if you know friends or relatives who buy their electricity from another utility, ask them why they're not asking their utility, why they're not doing this faster. It's really important for our kids and our grandkids. So, but nonetheless, we have every natural gas company putting in more. And this is how the total number of gas service lines that come to your neighborhood has also increased. Look at that. Increased by every single company. Also bad news. And what about the deliveries of natural gas in Minnesota to business? Those, unfortunately, are also increasing. Look at that. The reason I was asked to give this presentation to Governor Walz's Advisory Council on Climate Change is because the staff for this advisory council heard about this presentation and they said, you guys better show it to your advisory council because they're not following the law if they're letting this happen. All right. Now, okay. So unfortunately, this is the most depressing graph I'm going to show you. Minnesota is not on track to meet its buildings emissions reductions goals. Look at that. 2010, with some pauses in the timeline, out to 2038. And for Center Point in Minneapolis and Excel in other parts of Minnesota and these other natural gas companies, they're increasing the emissions. And for me, the most important bullet point is that Minnesota's buildings emissions reduction goal to get to 50% reduction by 2035 doesn't look like it's able to be achieved. We don't have a plan. And furthermore, before we came out with this study, I don't think anyone had ever seen this graph before because we put in probably hundreds of people's time on our staff to make calls and to search out all the documents that contain these numbers and put them together in a graph so we can see how we're heading in the wrong direction. So natural gas emissions, in fact, could be over twice the state reduction goal by 2035, not meeting the goal of cutting emissions, but increasing. So we need to think carefully about this. Another way to look at this is look at the red triangles, which show heating buildings, and we're putting more natural gas emissions from buildings go up over 140% by 2038. They're increasing. That's not a good sign for global warming and climate change. So the natural gas emissions are growing in opposition to the statewide emissions goals. All right. Another way to look at it is natural gas emissions from buildings could exceed emissions from electricity generation in just 5 years by 2030. That's the crossover point here, where, again, the red triangles show the buildings, and those would go and exceed the emissions from electricity. And already, you know, if you've been reading the paper, you know that Minnesota has now achieved 50% carbon-free electricity. And that's good. So it means we're doing a good job so far with electricity. We have to finish it off, but we can't leave behind these buildings. We need to come up with solutions to that. So the challenge with replacing existing gas infrastructure is that there's a lot of junk under the ground in a lot of places. And some of it has been underground for a long time. And all of it is going to be expensive to get rid of. But the first thing is we need to get the attention of the utilities and get them to admit they are not heading in the right direction. And especially to make sure that the regulators at the PUC who have control over the utilities, for them to say, you need to bring us really innovative ideas that meet this Natural Gas Innovation Act. And we're not talking about just planting a few trees and actually increasing the amount of natural gas you're burning too. That's not the way to do it. What it means is you need to think of things that are not as dangerous as natural gas and other fossil fuels. And we need to figure out how to get replacements for those in building. So for example, when I started out tonight and I gave you good news, I probably didn't tell you that before we built our new garage and put solar panels on it and got an EV, we had worked like demons for the last 15 years. And so now we use less electricity. Go check your bills at home. We have a 2-person household and we used about 300 kilowatt hours a month. Compare that to how you're doing in your home. Because I've seen Excel reports to me how my neighbors are doing without telling me the neighbors' names. But I know that my house is much more frugal in energy use than the neighbors are. But I've never talked to an audience of Minnesotans who don't proudly say, we're doing everything we can on energy efficiency, because I haven't met very many of those people. And we need to turn that around. And the federal government is actually offering free money to help you out. Use that money. It should be available for 10 years. Use it. So we also find that when we're replacing natural gas pipes with longer natural gas pipes, where we're extending the reach of the pipelines, or we're making bigger pipes that can carry more natural gas, that means we're growing the rate base. And what that means is the rate base is what we all pay for on our bills. And rate bases cost a lot of money, and it takes a lot of years to pay off those infrastructure improvements they've made. But then we're starting to force utilities and their regulators to ask, now, wait a minute, what does it mean that the state passed with bipartisan support a law that says by 2040, we're going to get 100% of our electricity from carbon-free? How does that sound if we're also increasing the reach of gas lines? And we're putting the cost for building those new gas lines on people who aren't born yet. And it's going to be very expensive. So we think utilities have a fundamental obligation, and this is in the law. The utilities who have to go before the Public Utilities Commission, the Utilities Commission only looks at 3 things. They look at the laws that the legislature has passed, and their job is to implement the laws. And they want to know, can we implement these and keep energy affordable for all people? Is it affordable? The second thing is it reliable? Because it's very important, it's utterly important to the PUC to keep the energy system utterly reliable for all of us. We know about that. We live in a place with cold winters and dark winters. We know how important electricity is. The third thing they do is to make sure that the laws the legislature has passed on energy, every single component of those laws that that affects the environment, those parts of the law must also be enforced. So that's a good regulatory body we have. They do a really good job. But it was really interesting, even at Fresh Energy, we had to do this study. And it took us months to do it. And now we've been getting it out very aggressively to the PUC. We've done presentations to them. We've done presentations to every utility. And they don't disagree with anything we've found. But we all need to figure out how we're going to attack this problem. So I mentioned the words rate base. This is the average rate base in dollars for, on the first line, CenterPoint Energy. That's over $1 billion in the rate base. And you have to divide that cost between all the customers, but it still turns out to be a very expensive cost.
Then annual cost?
Yes.
Annual.
Yeah. And Excel is a little less, but remember, what we don't want to do is when we're poised and we're making very big investments on climate action in Minnesota, we don't want to make the mistake of also redoubling the efforts to build more gas lines, because they've already been shown to us by scientists to be the wrong path. And so we need to go another way. So what I've done to help that is about 7 years ago, and I did not do it for a heating reason. About 7 years ago, our house had 2 huge window air conditioners. They were heavy. They were dangerous to put in the windows and to take out. I was always afraid we would drop them. We didn't, but they didn't cool our whole house. And so we went to see other houses in our neighborhoods, and they had mini splits. So they had heat pumps, and we decided we would put them in to replace our air conditioning. Because we found that starting about 7 years ago, we weren't able to productively work in our home for about 2 or 3 weeks every summer because we were too hot. But what we didn't know is the heat pump also acts as a free dehumidifier in our basement. So it means we got a heat pump water heater, and we never had to buy a dehumidifier for our basement. That saved a big cost for us and a lot of trouble for us. And the third thing we did is we noticed this heat pump works great down to about 0 degrees outside. So it can work to cool our house and it can heat our house. And so in recent winters, we have relied on our heat pump rather than our radiators for heating most spring months and most fall months. And that has meant in a typical year, we use 39% less natural gas in our house. So when you're asking people what they're doing to save and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from natural gas, that's one thing we started with, and we feel really good about it. And you can do it too. And you can get federal help for paying for these things, because these numbers are really frightening. And we can't talk about just letting companies add more gas lines. And yet that is what they're doing. But fortunately, the PUC has opened a new docket, and it's called the Future of Gas docket. And we're going to be all over that. So if you're not a member of ours, think about becoming a member, because we will work like dogs and make sure we cut as much gas emissions of natural gas as we can. All right, so I'm gonna turn it over to, well, this slide that I think is the most startling. Because what this says is that natural gas emissions could be over twice the state reduction goals by 2035, not down by 50%, but above. And now I'd like to open it up and see what questions you have. And maybe try to say your question loud and I'll repeat it into this microphone. Yes.
My question is, if we have state laws, and the utilities do not meet them, are there any consequences?
Yes.
And what are those?
Yes. And the question was, if utilities don't meet the laws of the land, do they face consequences? Indeed, they do. And the first bulwark of testing to make sure utilities are doing what they're supposed to do are the regulators at the Public Utilities Commission. So let me just say a few words about this in case you don't know. This is a board. It is 5 people. They serve 6-year terms. They have staggered terms. They've all been appointed by governors, and then their appointment has to be approved by the Minnesota Senate Energy Committee. 5 people. And get this, no more than any 3 of them may belong to any one political party. This is to ensure there's diversity on that commission. And I don't know, very often, recently there have been 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans and 1 independent. And sometimes people are just stalwart independents, and they have no track record of ever giving any money to any party. But this is important. This is important. And they work together. And they put the utilities through their paces. What they always do is ask the utility, every time there's a deadline coming up for a particular law, the biggest law that every utility has to meet is they have to show the PUC that their utility, and I'm just going to use as my example Xcel Energy because it's our biggest electric utility and I know them best. They have to come in every 2 years and propose a plan to the PUC of how Xcel Energy is going to meet all their customers' electricity needs or natural gas needs, because they have 2 plans for these. And how they're going to do it and how it's going to be affordable and utterly reliable. And by the way, when they submit one of these plans every 2 years, we see them the day they submit them at Fresh Energy. Thank goodness we have a big staff now, because these plans run typically 2,000 pages long. So typically we need to split up the plans and assign people to read carefully first, but we all read everything. And we're looking for the fact that the utility has to model what they're proposing. And the modeling results have to tell the PUC, yes, what they picked from what they modeled was the cheapest thing, the most reliable thing, and it met all the electrical and environmental requirements of the law. And very typically, it takes the PUC 1 or 2 years to assess a plan that is that complicated. And we have been involved, very involved in these plans on the same footing with the utilities. So it started when I started it about 15 years ago, when I said, look, Excel uses this private model. And we can't afford that model. We can't afford to use that model. So we can't go head to head with Excel because we can't have a modeler run that model because we can't afford it. And we had internal conversations and we talked with lots of partners. And we decided that we would go to a foundation and see if we could get enough money to run the same model that Excel was running. And guess what? They were so expensive. We got some money. I think we got $25,000. And this allowed us to hire a professional modeler team. And we got 3 months of their time in having access to the model and to run all the runs we wanted them to test that Excel had not tested. And that was a really good thing. Boy, was I was perspirating that day when I had sent our modeler, who works in extreme northern New York State, I sent her by FedEx a laptop that hadn't been ever used for anything else in fresh energy and could only be used with this model. And after she used it and her team used it on the model for 3 months, she had to immediately send it back to me. But guess what? When it was due by the FedEx truck couldn't find them. So the FedEx truck got the laptop to our modelers 3 days late. And I had to go to the model company and get their permission to use my computer with our modelers for an extra 3 days. Well, now things have advanced. Every utility now agrees on a uniform model to use, and it's much cheaper. But that's necessary. That's really necessary because in the 5 times that we've used modeling experts and tested what Excel is finding, we find if we are able to make the case effectively to the PUC that our modeling runs, which uses different assumptions about the economics of the utility system, it shows in every case that there were always cheaper things that Excel Energy could do if they replaced use of fossil fuels with more use of wind and solar and batteries. Every time the runs showed the cost was cheaper for every customer. And in some cases, when we got our plan approved, now I'm being a little facetious here, because we never wrote a plan for Excel. We're not allowed to do that. But we're able to show to the PUC that our results are more compelling because it's cheaper and a more reliable system. And you know what happens every time with Excel? In fact, the first time we showed this, when we had like $30,000 to spend for 3 months, the very first thing that Excel did when they saw us submit our results from our modeler, within a few weeks, Excel had quietly gone to the PUC and asked them to return their initial plan. That meant that Excel had to write a new plan, which it did, and which we looked at carefully when we got it in the usual process. And we split it up again because it was still 2,000 pages long. And we looked at it, and then we had a meeting, a series of meetings in our office and with our partners And one of us made the joke that this plan looked a lot like the Fresh Energy Plan. And that's the plan that the PUC approved. And that time it saved customers about $2 billion because of what we did. And we're still doing it. And in fact, Xcel has had its newest integrated resource plan approved. You know what the first plan said? The first plan said, we are going to close down all our coal plants, which we were triumphing of. That was a big win. But instead, we're going to build a massive amount of new natural gas to electricity plants. When we looked at that plan, we concluded in our office and with our partners that we thought we could do a better job of modeling it. And we went to work with our modelers and we came up with a very different plan. We submitted that to the PUC. And the first plan that the Xcel submitted back in 2023, it was no longer on the table. And instead, the PUC approved a plan that looked much more like a Fresh Energy and Partners plan. It also saved all of people who are Xcel customers a lot of money. And it meant, get this, in that plan, and it was approved in the first week of February this year. So I'm saying to you, it was a result that happened in Minnesota that was about climate, that was nowhere in the hands of the federal government, controlled by the state government. And it says that Xcel will reach the goal of getting to 100% carbon-free electricity, not by 2040. They'll do it by 2035, because in just the 5 years, they are going to add a little bit of new natural gas, a tiny little bit. And they're going to add about 2.7 times as much wind, solar energy, and batteries because of the case we made. It's something we can do for the future of gas docket. And the question of bringing it right in front of people's faces, that this is going in the wrong direction. And we need to turn around all the utilities. So now the burden is on our regulators, because they need to ask careful questions of every utility and make sure they're being as innovative as they possibly can be. Because it's not as if we can just keep natural gas around forever. We need to stop burning it.
So I have a quick question, and I'm going to come up
Okay.
so you don't have to repeat.
Okay.
I have a quick question, and then I have a question online.
Okay.
You mentioned that Xcel is going to stop using any fossil fuels for electricity by 2035. Did they talk about their gas business? If what their plan is for removing their natural gas side of their business by what year?
Yes, and one thing they did win in that integrated resource plan, it wasn't the very large amount of new natural gas plants they wanted to build, but they're going to build one new, very small natural gas plant in Lyons County, and it will be run as a backup. So it will run no more than a few hours per year. So that seemed like a good compromise for us to make. Because where? Because natural gas doesn't depend on sun shining or the wind blowing.
Right, but why
So-
can't they repurpose their plant to the
Because it would be more expensive to take a big plant, because what you just need is another smaller plant. if that makes sense.
Yeah, those are called
Yeah.
peaker plants.
Yeah, they're peaker plants.
So they're not the base load plant.
Yeah.
plants. They're just
Yeah.
smaller peaker plants that they have, that they can.
Yeah.
Right, the big gas turbines.
Yes,
They're totally
Yeah.
different. technology.
yeah.
All right, so the other question online
Mm.
from Sean Gashevsky is regarding supporting developers and builders to build natural gas-free new multifamily buildings while we wait for the new Minnesota Commercial Building Energy Performance Standards to kick in fully in 2036. Is Fresh Energy or doing anything about that?
I'll tell you something we started working on a couple years ago. And one thing we work on is energy codes. And we serve on a lot of energy code committees, not all of our staff, but specialists. And they are trying to meet with every code committee meeting and make sure that those people who are writing new energy codes, make sure they're cognizant of all the new innovations in the sector, which we don't always find to be the case. And what we got approved is there's an energy code in Minnesota that by 2038, which seems like a long time away, but it's really just around the corner, by 2038, the code requires 70% reduction in energy use by 2038 for new residential Minnesota buildings. So that is something that gets to the new buildings, which are an important part. And, you know, we've been reading, and some people have traveled to parts of Europe and seen a lot of these heat pumps all over the place. I've seen them all over the place. And I know what it means for new residential buildings that are built by 2038 will get at least 70% reduction in energy use. So what we need to do is find out many ways to attack this shared problem we have. And the first thing you need to do is not make dumb mistakes on new buildings. So making your new building codes, energy codes, as strong as possible. Because we know that older houses, like my house, is 102 years old. And I am not saying yet that my heat pump heats it all year long. But I'm always looking at new heat pumps, looking at more that are being developed for cold climates. And I'm confident that by some time, when we're still the owner of a house, we'll be able to get a heat pump that's going to operate well. But I want to make sure that it's going to be working, because I know I've been in my house one morning when it was minus 33 degrees Fahrenheit outside. And I am not a native Minnesotan. And in my native land in New York State, it had never gotten that cold. And that scared me. And we want to be protected against that. And we want to have a way to keep the house warm. But we should never turn our back on progress. That's the thing I love best about America, and especially Minnesota. Minnesota is so filled with innovators and entrepreneurs in every sector. I tell you, when I go out speaking, and I go out 50 times a year, from every audience, I learn something I haven't heard that's new in Minnesota. That's good news. And that is what gives me hope. And I think we had a question over here, and then we'll come back to you in front.
Well, my question was about data centers, that are
Oh.
coming to the state. Is that housing?
Yes, and I'm not an expert in data centers, but what's up with data centers? And they're in hyperscale. There are a lot of really big and some of the richest companies in the US that want to build data centers to store data and to do AI work. And they're looking in a number of states, and Minnesota happens to be one of those states. And a lot of these companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google. A lot of those would like to use zero carbon energy. And they know Minnesota's a champion of zero carbon energy. And they also know data centers need a lot of water. And Minnesota is a state that has a lot of. But there is a lot of controversy that's been showing up all over the legislature about these data centers because many Minnesotans are concerned about whether we're talking about giving away too much to very wealthy companies to locate their data centers here, unless we're very sure about how much energy, where the energy is going to come from, where the water is going to come from, and what it will do in the community, because it can be a very big building. I don't know how it's going to work out this year. I'm not even sure that the legislature is going to end up as business by May 19th. They may go into special session. I don't know. But I'm hearing lots of things, and these companies are coming around to a lot of states. And what they're always trying to do is try to get the best deal from some suckers who want to give up anything to get. And I just don't think that most Minnesotans want to give up everything. We want to have more of a process in the political system and with communities, so more people can weigh in and really understand what we're going to be getting and if they're paying their fair shot of the costs. Yeah. So I don't know how it's, and this is only the first gambit. Yeah, so we should be watchful of it. Yes. Yes.
On that topic, it just bothers me that EVs are the ones people are pointing to as this big electricity pole.
Yeah.
These data centers are like multitudes.
Yeah.
Worse, right?
Yes. I was one of the last people I know who got an EV. And I bought it in September 2024. And mostly the reason is I'm not really in love with cars. We have always had one car in our family. It's usually been a Toyota Prius for the last 15 years. And that Prius was pretty damn good. Got like 51.5 miles per gallon for 15 years. And we didn't drive it very much. And nothing really was grabbing my attention. But then when we had a garage built that could power an EV with the sun, I started looking around. But we knew this would be our only car because we don't need more than one car. And we've never bought a brand new car. So I was looking only at used cars. And then I noticed, wow, there was this Nissan EV that was a year old, and I found it for sale at a really good price. And it was by far the nicest car I've ever owned, and it didn't cost very much more. And I'm very happy to have it. And it was worth it for me to wait around and feel good about it. So
If you need the library card, please come up and see us at the Ask Us desk at this time. The children's play area will be closing in 15 minutes for cleanup. In the meantime, please make your final selection and make your way towards self-checkout. Thank you.
we have a lot of people in our transportation section that's been at the Capitol a lot in the past few months. And they're very rightfully upset that there's no reason why an owner of an EV should be charged an undue amount of money for improving the roads. Yes, we should be helping improve the roads and repair the roads because we drive on the roads. But in fact, if you look at the numbers, electric vehicles are already paying their share. So we're fighting those outrageous increases for electric vehicle owners. And we see, when we're looking around the whole country, every state apparently has a lot of people who, for some reason, don't like electric vehicles. And I think it's okay if you don't like electric vehicles. But you should look at some of the data and you'll see that these are really good cars. And I haven't been to a gas station with my electric vehicles since September 3rd, 2024. And I really like that. And it's much cheaper to run and it has no moving parts. I'm never taking it in for an oil change. Yeah.
Okay, my
But-
real
but-
question was about the,
What the,
I'm thinking about those thousands, hundreds of thousands of miles of lines underground,
yes,
and I'm thinking,
yeah.
we got a geothermal system at our home.
Oh, good. That's good.
And it heats well down to, I think it runs even down to maybe 13 or 14 below zero. It's still running. We do have gas backup. And the air conditioning is super efficient.
Huh,
I think it costs like $50 for the summer or something.
yeah.
And I'm just thinking of all those lines underground, and isn't there a way that we could use the heat of the earth to
Yeah.
get some heating? I don't know. Is there a way?
There is a package still alive at the legislature that would provide money for more geothermal systems. So I don't know what will come out of the legislature. But I know I've talked to people like you. I'm glad to meet you. I would love to come and see your system sometime. It's great. But we need more possibilities and more innovation that don't give us much more pollution and uses the resources that we have here. Like that the air down in pore spaces is always like 47 degrees. Why not use that to help cool or heat the house? That makes a lot of sense. Doesn't mean you can't do it everywhere yet, because sometimes you have to go very deep, or sometimes you have to go out laterally. And I would need to upset about 16 of my neighbors if I were trying to do that, because we have small lots in St. But there are many cases where that is a really good idea. And the whole new development, the Heights development in St. Paul, is now in the process of building 1,000 units, and they'll all be heated and cooled without any carbon emissions. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And that's going on, and you should tell more people about that. And more people should know that there were people who came and put up money for that. And Jimmy Carter was even here for one day before he died, in his Habitat for Humanity building there. I should close up now. But please, I'm going to be around here till 8, but I'm going to just be picking up some few things. But well, maybe I'll take one more question, or should I? What do you think? This man has had his hand up the longest, I think.
I got two questions.
Oh,
Wait.
okay.
We're talking about 2035. When do I lose my gas stove?
When do you?
Is natural gas gonna be shut off at some point for everybody who's using it now?
No, there's no proposals to shut off people's gas.
Talking about wind, talking about solar, talking about batteries. You didn't say, what about nuclear? Why not?
So the question is about
yes.
nuclear.
Yes. Yes, and we get about 25% of our energy from nuclear. And those 2 units will go on extended lifespans now, if the feds approve that. The state is in the process of approving them. Both Monticello and Prairie Island will go running till 2050, 2052, and 2053, which is absolutely mandatory because nuclear is carbon-free. That's very important. And now there's discussion at the legislature of removing, since before my time, that there was legislative kibosh on no nuclear. So I think that there's going to be more discussion of that, and it's happening in a lot of places. I don't know what will happen. But what I would remind people is that most of what is being talked about in nuclear hasn't yet been piloted, and it needs to be piloted to make sure that it works, that it's affordable, and that it won't take too long. So we need to pilot more of those
Yeah,
ideas.
it's called small modular nuclear.
Yes. And so what I do, and I'm a person who was raised by a father who was running a research nuclear reactor in the company he worked for. So I know what research reactors, how small they are, what they can do. And I think that it's a technology that is very interesting.
All right, well, let's give Jay a hand. And thank you, everyone.
And I'm gonna just make one more stand up for there's several sign up sheets up there. One is from our hosts, but the other one is from Fresh Energy. And it says, if you want to sign up to be part of our Clean Energy Action Network, we will send you an email once a month, and it'll say, you know, this issue is going to be resolved. It's going to be voted on soon. And you can weigh in. And we will send you a sample letter or message you could leave for your elected official. And you can change that any way you want. And what we find is whenever we send these out, we send them out now to about 3,500 people. Usually a third of those people take action within 24 hours. Because what they've found is what I've found too. And when we send these out, and we send them out to every district in Minnesota, we have members in every district. The day after we send them out, if I happen to be in the legislature that day, and elected officials see me, they often know who I am. They will come up to me and they'll say, Jay, I got calls from 35 of my constituents last night about this issue. Do you know anything about that? And I'll tell them what we did, that we sent and told people that there was this important issue being discussed, and they could weigh in with their elected officials. So if you'd like to do that, you can do that too. It's also the way you're going to hear from me when the Governor's Advisory Council is ready to put out their new draft proposals for the next steps. And if you want to weigh in on it, you'll have like a month or 2 months. And I'll tell you, this is set to go. If you want me to come and explain to you what it is, I can also tell you how to weigh in with your, and I think it's really important in a democracy with a small d for everyone to weigh in on things that are important to them. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Great.